What if the Supreme Court could change the rules for millions of people overnight without a big courtroom showdown, without hours of TV coverage, and without a long, detailed opinion explaining itself? Because that's basically what's been happening in recent headlines. The court hits pause on a major policy, or it lets major policy go into effect, all through emergency orders before the justices ever even hear the full case. If that sounds like a, wait, since when can they do that? You need to know about Supreme Court's shadow docket. Welcome to Project Liberty, where we break down how your government actually works. On today's show, we're actually talking about the shadow docket. The name sounds like a Batman spinoff, but it's real. And it can change your life without the kind of public decision you'd normally expect. So here's the plan. First, what is the shadow docket in plain English? Second, how it works mechanically. And third, why it's controversial. And finally, what you can watch for when the rules seem to change overnight. So let's start with the normal Supreme Court process. A case takes months, sometimes years. They read briefs, they hear oral arguments, and they write a long opinion. That's the big front door of the court. Now, the shadow docket is the side door. It's a bunch of decisions the court makes quickly, often with very short orders, often very little explanation, and sometimes without even saying which justices agreed or disagreed. Now, to be clear, a shadow docket isn't a formal legal term. It's a nickname, but it captures the vibe. Big impact, low visibility. It's like your HOA changing the rules at 11:58 p.m., and you only find out because your car gets towed at 6 a.m. That's kind of how this works. So how does the court do this? Usually through emergency requests. These are specifically, hey, Supreme Court, we need you right now. The court can respond with a few key moves, and I promise this won't turn into a law school lecture, so hang with me. First, a stay. A stay is a pause button, and it temporarily stops a lower court ruling from taking effect. Second, an injunction. An injunction is a do it or don't do it order. It tells someone to stop enforcing a rule or start doing something. Third, the court can deny emergency relief. That sounds boring, but it can be huge. Because if the court refuses to back something, the policy might go into effect while lawsuits continue. And here's the key. These are often temporary decisions. They're supposed to hold things steady while a full case plays out. But temporary can reshape real life. If a policy lasts for months and years during litigation, that's not a small footnote. That's the main event. Emergency orders move fast. Like, we need an answer by Friday fast. Sometimes we need an answer in hours fast. Lower courts might be handling a complicated case, then suddenly, boom, an emergency application lands at the Supreme Court. And the court has to then change what's happening around the grounds immediately. That's why you'll see the headlines like, the Supreme Court blocks X, or the Supreme Court allows Y to take effect, even though the court hasn't even heard the full arguments yet. Think of it like sports. A normal Supreme Court case is like a full season. The shadow docket is the ref making a call that decides the game before the replay review even loads. And then the ref walks out like, no further questions. So let's talk some real world examples, and this is where it gets real. In recent years, the court has used emergency orders in fights over immigration policies, election rules, public health rules, environmental regulations, abortion-related restrictions and access, and battles between federal agencies and states. And here's the pattern that we should recognize. A policy gets challenged, a lower court blocks it or forces it to happen, then the Supreme Court is asked to step in immediately. Sometimes the court pauses the policy, and that means the government can't enforce it for now. Sometimes the court lets the policy run. That means that it affects people while the case continues. And sometimes months later, the court never takes the full case. So the emergency order becomes a practical final answer, at least for a long while. Now, there are two big concerns that people raise. One is transparency and the other is power. Let's do transparency first. In major cases, the court usually writes down a full opinion. You get reasoning, you get logic, you get dissents, and you can see the actual arguments. With shadow dockets, you might get a paragraph or a sentence, sometimes nothing but granted or denied. And that makes it harder for the public to understand what's happening. It also makes it harder for lower courts to know how to apply the Supreme Court's thinking next time. Now let's move on to power. Emergency decisions were supposed to be rare, like a fire extinguisher or break glass in case of emergency. But critics argue that the court has used them more and more, And the more you decide through emergencies, the more you're making power policy without a full process. Supporters say sometimes you need quick action, like if a lower court ruling would cause chaos nationwide, or if there's a time-sensitive deadline. Now, critics say, cool, but where's the explanation? And why does this keep happening on the biggest issues? So here's the inside baseball part in normal people language. A lot of emergency requests go just to one justice. That justice is assigned based on region. They're called a circuit justice, meaning they handle emergency matters from certain parts of the country. Now, that justice can act alone sometimes, but big disputes often get sent to the full court. Then the justices vote, and out comes an order. And because it's fast, the briefing is shorter. The record can be messy, and the court is making a huge call with less time and less information than usual. If you've ever made a big life decision at 2 a.m., you get the concern. Okay, so what does that mean in your life? It means major national rules can change while you're at work, or while you're picking up the kids, or while you're just trying to have one peaceful night on Netflix. Because an emergency order can decide whether a regulation is enforced or passed, the state law is blocked or allowed, a federal policy can move forward or gets frozen. And even if it's temporary, it can shape what happens for months. Sometimes an entire election cycle, sometimes an entire school year, sometimes long enough that the temporary reality becomes the new normal. So here's something actionable. When you see a headline that says the Supreme Court blocks or allows, something that you should look at is these rules. 1, does it say emergency order or emergency application? 2, does it say stay or injunction? That's your pause or stop start. 3, does it mention a full decision later, like the merits? The merits just mean that the real final case decision will be after the full briefing and argument. And 4, did the court explain itself? If it's just a short order, you're probably looking at a shadow docket action. So let me ask you, do you think the Supreme Court should have to explain itself more on emergency orders? Or do you want speed, even if it's messy? So drop your take in the comments and tell me what headline that made you feel like the rules were changed overnight. If you want more breakdowns on how power actually moves in this country, subscribe to my channel, Project Liberty, because the shadow docket won't be the last time the government changes your life without a big, obvious vote. Next week, we're staying in the how it works lane. We're breaking down how one judge can block a national policy and why it keeps happening. Thank you guys for showing up. I'm glad you're here. We'll see you next time.